Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Usman Bugaje, who is speaking to us today on Islamic education in Africa today. But before we start our main talk, we're going to have a recitation of Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم. هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم. ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم. مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين. قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون. وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much for that beautiful recitation. We now are very fortunate to have Dr. Usman Bugaje today speaking on this really important topic. Firstly, a little bit about Dr. Bugaje, who is someone who many in the community may already be aware of, as he has come and spoke and met many of us before. He's speaking to us today on Islamic education in Africa today, the history and contemporary challenges. Dr. Usman Bugaje is an Islamic scholar, a political activist, a civil society leader, and a thinker from Nigeria. He initially trained as a pharmacist, but his postgraduate studies have included an MA in the interdisciplinary social science program on African studies at the Institute of African Asian Studies in the University of Khartoum, and a doctorate in intellectual history of West Africa, focusing on the tradition of Tajdid in western bilad al-Sudan, from the same institution. He has served as special advisor on political affairs to the Nigerian Vice President, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, in the presidency of 1999 to 2003. In 2003, he was elected to represent the Kaita Jibaya Federal Constituency at the Federal House of Representatives, where he chaired the House Committee on Foreign Affairs until 2007. He was appointed National Secretary of the Action Congress, where he worked to institutionalize democratic reforms and greater participation of women. He contested for the governorship of Katsina State under the Action Congress. And in 2016, he declined an offer from President Buhari to consider an ambassadorial appointment. He's the author of numerous book reviews published in the Muslim World Book Review and a range of conference papers and academic articles. And it is a great pleasure to have, a great honor to have him speak to us today on Islamic education in Africa, the history and contemporary challenges. Thank you very much, Dr. Bugaje.
It's my great pleasure, Mr. and it is also a great pleasure to be in this very good company and to be able to discuss issues that I think are very important to us, particularly Islamic education. I'm speaking of Islamic education in Africa because relatively I would be more familiar with the history of Islamic education in Africa. But I think education today and anywhere, whether in China or in Europe or in America or anywhere, is perhaps the one most important issue. As has been said severally, in the 21st century, knowledge is the greatest capital. And how do we really acquire that knowledge? How do we utilize it is one of the biggest issues we are confronted with daily. So today, I wanted to share with you Islamic education in Africa, both a very quick overview of its history in Africa and also the contemporary challenges that are being faced in Africa. I have tried to summarize or make it easy to understand, and I want to speak on this issue in three distinct sections. First, general ideas or facts about Islam in Africa that not many people are familiar with that I thought I should share. And secondly, the major phases in the development of education in Africa. And then we come to the third and the final section, which deals with the contemporary challenges and the vision of the future. Now, the facts that I want to consider, want you to consider that I think are very important, and they have some kind of relevance that we still need to continue to fathom, and that is that first, Islam, as some of you remember, crossed to Africa before it even went to Medina. Because the first hijrah was to Abyssinia, which is currently in the area of Ethiopia. And we thought that is quite significant because a lot of these things are not chanced. They are basically divine plans. And therefore, it's important that we reflect on that significance. Secondly, the first, second, and third university in the world were, started both in Africa, and they still are in Africa. The Qarawiyun University in Fez, which started in 859 AD, and the University of Azhar, which started in 970 AD, and the University of Sankore in Timbuktu, which is currently in Mali, in Africa, which started in 989 AD, were the first, second, and third universities in the world in that sequence, because the first university in the West was the one that started in Bologna in Italy. It started in 1088 AD. I think it's significant to remember. And a lot of scholars who have studied the studies or the growth of universities in both the Muslim world and the West, like one George Makdisi has recorded the these developments and the way that Islamic education in Spain triggered the Renaissance, which started in Florence in Italy, and how that has actually led to the intellectual revival of the West. And it's interesting that he said in the, I think, 12th century in Europe, or around that particular period, scholars that want to show that they have accomplished much must be able to speak some words in Arabic and have some books in Arabic on their shelf to demonstrate the breadth of their knowledge and the fact that they have taken that knowledge from its source. So these are all factors that I think is worth, factors that are worth taking note of. Third point on this section is the fact that, and I find this particularly interesting, the first, the second, and the third universities in the world were all auspiciously, perhaps, started or financed or built by women. The University of Qarawiyun, which is still standing, and is still awarding degrees, and you have a lot of students studying there in Fez, in Morocco, was actually started by a lady, Fatima Al-Fihri. And when she died, her sister continued financing the building of that university. Similarly, Azhar, as many of you know, was built in the name of Fatima Zahra, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by the Fatimid regime in Egypt. This is the Shia regime in Egypt that ruled between the 10th, I think, to about the 12th century in Egypt. And it still stands as a kind of honor to this great lady. And similarly, the one in Sankore. Sankore is one of the three big mosques and therefore three big centers of learning, and they are considered three universities in Timbuktu. Timbuktu was a huge, perhaps the biggest center of learning in sub-Saharan Africa in that period of time, and until 1591, when it was actually invaded by Moroccan forces, it was the largest, the biggest, both in terms of intellectual center, but also in terms of commerce and business. And therefore, it is quite significant that the first of the three, the other two being the Jengrebe, this is the local name for the Grand Mosque, and also the Sidi Yahya Mosque, they are all standing. You can still see them when you go to Timbuktu at the moment. Perhaps, of course, shadow of what they used to be, but they remain as the fact that these are all women speaks to the role that women played in Islamic education in Africa. So let me move quickly to the next phase, which is the major phases in the development of education in Africa. Some of you will remember that after the demise of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba did not all remain in Medina. They actually spread themselves out, and they went to west and east in different directions to spread the word and to be able to continue da'wah. And some of them did come to North Africa, and in what is today Tunisia in particular, Qayrawan was one of those centers of learning that was established as a result of the activities of the Sahaba, because many people, came to them to take knowledge, and that base of theirs became a school and kept expanding, and scholars emerged out of those kind of schools, and they also had students, and they were having network of teaching and learning across Africa. So that particular center in Qayrawan, which is currently in Tunis, was one of the first centers of learning, even before Azhar came into existence. And it is the scholars of Qayrawan that actually sparked a famous movement, the Al-Murabitin movement. And in Western history, usually it's called Al-Murabids. And Al-Murabids are I mean, their leader actually was a teacher, or he took knowledge from the scholars of Qayrawan, and he was a Berber. That's the area of Morocco, Mauritania, Algeria. I mean, this was an area that was inhabited by Berbers. Of course, it's all mixed now, Berbers, Arab tribes, African tribes. But I mean, it used to be in the 9th, 10th century, exclusively inhabited by Berbers who had to learn Arabic because they had their own Berber language that's quite separate from Arabic language, which I understand is still extinct at the moment. So these scholars like Abdullah bin Yassin came back to the area of Morocco, Mauritania, and started opening schools, started teaching, and that's how they raised a number of network of scholars that created the movement of Almoravid. The Almoravid movement, as you know, crossed over, took over Spain. I think it was in 1050s or 1060s, took over Spain and started ruling Spain from Marrakesh before it actually moved its headquarters right into Spain, which became the famous Andalus. And you know what has happened in Andalus? A huge, great Islamic civilization was built. Of course, after about 1.5 centuries, the Almoravitin handed over, or was, the leadership was taken over by Al-Muwahidin, Al-Muhads, as they are often called in Western history. And these are the ones that actually produced that fantastic Islamic civilization in Europe that basically triggered the Renaissance in the 12th, 15th, and 12th to 15th century, and produced huge scholars like the famous names of Ibn Rushd. Ibn Rushd, of course, are two. There is the philosopher, and there is also the faqih. One is the grandson of the other. And you have Ibn Hazm. You have huge Qadi Iyad. You have a large number of great scholars. They were all product of this movement that started in the Berber area of North Africa. Of course, the Almoravidin split into two. While one half moved into Spain and established the Andalusian civilization, the other came down into an area called Odegast, which is still in part of southern Mauritania, and established the Islamic civilization in Ghana. From Ghana, of course, after growing and expanding, it became the Mali Empire. Many people remember Mansa Musa, who made the famous pilgrimage to Mecca, who took a lot of gold, because this is a gold producing area up till now, or up to today. And he had so much gold that the price in the world market of gold, fell because of the presence of his own gold. But that's not so much what we remember him in Africa for. We remember him in Africa as one leader who made the pilgrimage, but brought in a number of scholars that actually augmented the educational institutions, especially the ones in Timbuktu. And he brought architects, new buildings, a number of skills, created roads and made commerce, boosted commerce and trade and a number of other connections. So this period, usually between the 800 to about the 1700, was some kind of golden age, in the sense that Islam and Islamic education centers started sprouting, and there were many of them, and they produced a huge amount of literature, not only in terms of religious learning, in the sense of like tafsir of the Quran or hadith, or even fiqh, which is the jurisprudence, but also in terms of culture, literature, civilization, and even science and technology. We have not studied the material that are available. For example, if you go to the Ahmed Baba Center of Documentation, Ahmed Baba was one of the great scholars of Timbuktu. If you see the huge materials that are available, I had the opportunity to be there when I was preparing for my PhD, and I know that we have not touched at the time I visited, which was not too long ago. I mean, 30 years ago or thereabouts. At that time, not up to 1/10 of the materials that were collected were really studied. Yes, they were documented, but there were huge material that have not been studied. So this period of, like, from the 800 to about the 1700, which is nearly a millennium, I mean, it's a period when Islamic education grew in bounds and bouts. And it sort of covered not only the area of current or present day Mauritania, it went all through sub-Saharan Africa, of course, in North Africa, up to the what we call Ethiopia today, and went down up to Mozambique. In fact, up to areas of current Congo and maybe Rwanda. There are lots of materials that suggest that uh, Islamic education is spread into that part of the world during this particular period. So it was a golden age of Islamic education in Africa, and the scholars were moving from one center of learning to the other, settling down. So you have a kind of network of scholarship. People moving from one center to the other, and these centers were well developed, usually around mosques. They became universities. Scholars were famous. Others will travel to study certain books or certain knowledge and get a certificate, which was called the ijaza, which is like a permission to teach what you have learned from that particular teacher. So it was quite structured. It was not like it was not random. I mean, if you are going to study, you must have completed a certain level of study before you move to the next. And if you want to branch out to certain branches of knowledge, you must have done this, you must have done that. So there were some kind of curriculum, there were scholarship, a kind of established pattern of study and scholarship, and people who were writing, I mean, new ideas, new knowledge, expansion of what what was there. I mean, lots of other activities during this period. The second period that is of particular significance was the period between the 1700 to the 1900. Uh, Even though in one part, that was the time when Timbuktu got invaded by Moroccan forces, and got that's about 1591, and then that brought a lot of setback in terms of the proliferation of knowledge in Africa, but also that was the time when the Sufi orders, particularly the Qadiriya, the Shaziliya, the Naqshbandiya, and of course the Tijaniya actually spread all over the North Africa, West Africa, East Africa. And also these are network of scholars, but of course with the Sufi inclination. So Sufi ideas, Sufi thoughts were spread particularly during this period. And it has its own dimension in terms of the depth of knowledge and the building of a particular kind of character within the Muslim civilization or Muslim polity. So this period also was a very important period. At the end of it, that was the period we had a lot of the jihad movement in Somalia, in what is called, I mean, northern Nigeria at the moment, the Sokoto Caliphate, and the jihad of Ahmad Labo in Masina, which is about still part of Mali, and that of Umar al-Futi again in Mali. This is all something that took place within the 100 years of the uh, 19th century. I mean, the jihad of Usman Fodio was in 1804. And these jihad movements were actually intellectual movements that were aimed at, reforming societies. And so they were engaged in intensive educational activity, and they wrote a huge amount of literature. It's like a period when perhaps most of the production in terms of local literature, tafsir, ulum al-hadith, usul al-fiqh, and a lot of others, including medicine. And because they wrote quite a lot about medicine, the Sokoto Caliphate is the most known, the most studied, and the three scholars that led this movement, Usman Danfodio, his brother Abdullahi, and his son Muhammad Bello, the three of them together wrote something in the region of well over 300 books of different fields. But also they created the kind of momentum for women's scholarship. The daughter of Usman Danfodio, Asma, wrote about, I think, about 86 different types of work. All these have been documented. Some of them have been translated. Some have not yet been translated. But this is to say that during this period of 18th to 19th century, there was a huge boost in education in Africa. And this is across, even in North Africa, but particularly in the sub-Saharan Africa, starting from current Senegal and Gambia until you get to of course, across Sudan until you get to Ethiopia and Somalia. And the Sufi network also helped a lot in the social integration of the societies of the sub-Saharan Africa. And these activities actually trickled down to areas of Mozambique, of course, Kenya, Somalia, Mozambique, part of Uganda, and so it continued. But for the disruption of the by the colonization that took place at the beginning of the 20th century, that's from the 1900s onwards, this spread would have been completed maybe by another 100 years down to South Africa. Of course, South Africa has its own wave of Islamic education, but this time coming from Malaysia, Southeast Asia in particular. And that also had its own impact, and it has, created a large number of Muslim communities, not the majority, but certainly most visible, most active, and they have developed their own madrasa, very much along the line of the Southeastern Asian tradition of Islamic learning, and this has continued. So during this period, basically that's the pre-colonial period, even with the setback that Timbuktu saw in 1591, generally speaking, Islamic education from the beginning up to that period of time had been growing, a natural growth, and it has been expanded. Like I said, the range of subjects that were studied were not strictly what we may call today religious subjects. There was studies in literature, in philosophy, in technology, in medicine, and lots of books are available that document that kind of development, and it's astonishing to see. And some of you may have noticed when this Corona started and there was talks on the issue of vaccines, some of you may have come across something that speaks to some of these things, that what actually started vaccine, I think in Boston in the United States, and this is something that Johnson & Johnson as a company actually, they made fortunes out of that, was a West African slave who actually gave them the idea of how to treat smallpox when it broke out in Boston. And this knowledge he brought from West Africa of the inoculation, taking a bit of the substance itself and puncturing the body and inserting it in ways that will stimulate the response from the body. So the concept itself and the idea was actually picked from a West African slave. Now this itself tells you the level of medical science in West Africa at that particular time. And indeed, there are books that speak to the kind of knowledge that that particular slave was able to transfer to the United States. I mean, those books are dated, so you can actually you can see the link between that knowledge, that saved life and became what it became today, and the level of learning in those particular communities in West Africa. A lot of research will reveal a number of other things that time will not here allow me to perhaps discuss. So let me move to the area of the last point on this second segment, and that is the colonial period. Now, of course, the colonial enterprise was not an act of philanthropy. It was basically an attempt to maximize the exploitation of the human and material resources in Africa. And the European colonialists did not pretend. They were basically there to exploit the resources for their own benefits. But of course, one of the major resistance they got were from the Muslims, because they were well educated, they were well informed, they were governing themselves. So even though in terms of technology, they were able to overcome the polities in Africa, but in terms of social thinking and in terms of civilization, they didn't have much really to contribute. If anything, Muslim scholars knew about the Europeans, they have read about them. In fact, there were, the incidents, some incidents were documented when Mungo Park and I think Clapperton, these are all British explorers, came to Sokoto and met Muhammad Bello. That was a few decades before the invasion by European colonialists, and he was engaging them in on Europe and the different type of Christian sects that were available in that time. And I think it was Clapperton or one of them actually admitted in his own diary that he found that he could not engage Bello on this because Bello knew far more about the different types of sects of Christianity in Europe than he did. And so these people were reading well ahead of a lot of the European people. And also remember, the time of colonization was a post-Enlightenment period when Europe itself has basically separated or divorced itself from religion. And therefore, they were not particularly moral in what they do. And as one of them actually admitted that they were not there on behalf of Christianity. In fact, they only go to church. One of them said when the ground was too wet to play golf. So they were not particularly representing Christianity, but they made use of Christian missionaries that came ahead of them to be able to reach communities that were not yet literate, because Muslims had the monopoly of literacy in Africa. Because before them, or before colonization, uh, very rare do you find any African community that was literate. And they were literate not only in Arabic, but even in their own local languages. They were writing their local languages using the Arabic script. So one of the things that the colonial policies did was essentially to stifle the development of Islamic education. And they succeeded in doing that by not only by establishing secular schools, but also by cutting the resources available to these schools. And the idea was basically to uh, cut the supply line of these schools so that over time they will not have the same resources available to them, to expand. And they also made sure they curtail the movement of scholars from one particular location to the other, partly because they were worried about their experiences with the Mahdi movement in the Sudan. I mean, as you know, the British particularly suffered a lot from the Mahdi in the Sudan, and they were pathological about the presence of Mahdi or any form of insurrection in the name of religion. And therefore they were quite repressive in certain cases. And they, so some of these measures, and also the policy of when they give their literacy figures, they ignore the fact that before they came, people were actually literate. Just like you go to China now and say that China, I mean, Chinese don't understand the Latin script, and therefore they are illiterates. Chinese are not illiterate; they are literate in their own way. So it's the same thing. They sort of categorize Muslims who were not literate in the Latin script, as illiterates. So they had a preferential policy for those who study, I mean, those who have learned the Latin script, and they did everything to discourage, Islamic education. There were policies, but more importantly, they made sure that the younger generation, the ones that they were going to hand over to eventually when they have to leave, were ignorant about their own history. They did a lot of collection of the manuscripts, and they kept them away. I mean, I'm about 70 now, and I recall when we were in school, in primary school and in secondary school, we were not taught anything about our own history. And subsequently, people had to fight, even though it was an independent Nigeria, but it was so deep that in part of the reason why really I left pharmacy to do a master's in African studies and eventually to study intellectual history is because we realized that even historians in our universities in our own days, and I graduated in 1975, were not really informed about our own history. So when we ask our colleagues in the departments of history to tell us about our own history or to give a public lecture, they end up just regurgitating what they have learned from their own European teachers and European books, and which is basically to say that until the Europeans came, Africa had no knowledge, they had no education, they had no this, they had no that, they had no that, which of course we discovered was not true. So there was a lot of problem. Now, I mean, created for Islamic education during this period, and this is not for Nigeria alone, or Gambia, or Ghana. You go as far as, of course, Senegal, Mali. You go as far as Mozambique, which is essentially a Muslim country, and had a lot of these local Quranic schools from where you graduate and then you go for higher education, and then you proceed until you become a scholar if you so wish. All these areas, I mean, where kind of that were under colonial rule, Islamic education was severely limited, discouraged, and where they could close these schools, they closed them where they would stifle either by cutting the supply line or by proposing policies in doing that. Now, I have included a review of a book I did, I think, about 2-3 years ago on Islamic education in Africa that focuses around that particular period, the colonial and the post-colonial period. So those who might be interested can look at this review and see the more specific policies that the Portuguese had, for example, in Mozambique, the French had, for example, in Senegal and Mali, the British had, in Kenya, Nigeria, Sudan, and other places that they colonized, so that we can have an idea. But the short and long of it is that during the colonial period, there was a severe encumbrances put by the colonial European administrations. It's basically some kind of subversion. But because the education they introduced was basically secular, so it left the societies with some kind of a kind of epistemological conflict between the two systems of education. And that's what is going to, that's what has engaged us from that particular period of time. In other words, many Muslims in Niger, current Niger Republic and Nigeria, and even in parts of other parts of West Africa, actually refuse to take their children to the British schools because of the lack of trust and because of the policies they have seen, the hostility that they have seen on the British schools. Even up to up to today, there are still people who are resistant, but they continue with their Islamic education. Of course, it's not as funded as it used to be, and therefore you have children that are said to be out of school, and they are not strictly out of school because they are in a school. It's just that they are in a school that has not been recognized by colonial administration, and the administration that came after, the so-called independent African states, continued along that particular path. And up till now, there is a lot of tension between the traditional Islamic education and the modern Western education that has been. In reality, as many of you would know, the sources are the same. In other words, it's not that there is, but because the education that the colonial authorities came along with the secular dimension, which actually came about as a result of the Enlightenment in Europe, this divorce between religion and society, then it created a tension in a society that believes in God and sees God as the ultimate. Now you take your son to school, and then he is in a school where God does not exist, where you speak about God, you are laughed at in a way, and so it created this tension. And imagine a young child, dressed up, like a European with a tie. He goes to school in the morning where no mention of God is allowed. And he comes back in the afternoon, and then he takes off those clothes, and then he wears a long jalabiya with some kind of cap, and then he carries his Quran, and he goes to a madrasa, and what he's taught is entirely different, in the sense that here the presence of God is very obvious, reference to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all these things. So you have got this child, growing into two different epistemological worlds. One where God is obvious, and the other where God is completely absent. And it creates some kind of, if you like, subclinical schizophrenia, because you have got, you don't have a united, if you like, a unified system of knowledge. And this is this study has not been sufficiently done to establish the damage that some of these things has done to our own children. I mean, children of Muslims in Africa. A few people have made reference to this, but I'm not aware of studies that have gone deeper, and I think we need to do this. But generally speaking, the colonial enterprise left us with this kind of conflict where Muslims, fearing the hostility, have withdrawn from the modern secular, but those who took over the government are graduates of the modern secular schools. So it also created a lack of trust in governance, and it creates the kind of the kind of tensions that have led to the issue of Boko Haram today in Nigeria. I'm sure you are very familiar with the conflict created by Boko Haram, and the Boko Haram is just one exhibition or one particular it's just one display consequences of some of these tensions. There are a number of others, some not as serious as Boko Haram, but nevertheless quite serious enough to create these particular tensions. So I move now to the contemporary challenges, and the most important issue at the moment that we are facing, or in Islamic education in Africa is facing, is how to deal with this tension that has been created by European colonization. In other words, how do we proceed? There are lots of attempts to integrate this education, both the Islamic and the Western modern education, into one stream. But there are a lot of resistance also from society. And therefore, the part of the challenges we are facing is how do we create an educational system that is at once modern in the sense that it learns the modern skills, modern sciences, but at the same time Islamic. Now, this is something that Sudan as a country has tried to resolve. This is something that Morocco has tried as a country. A number of countries have their own different experiences. Right now in Nigeria, we're in the process of trying to resolve these issues finally. And there is a lot of work that is being done towards an ultimate national summit on Islamic education in a way that will bring in the National Assembly, that's the parliament, bring in the executive arm of government, bring in the scholars, bring in the traditional leaders, so that we are all going to agree on exactly a pattern that we will, a particular way that will bring about a lot of these things. So this is something that is taking place in many countries in Africa at the moment. But there are two other points that I think are important, even as we are trying to get this to confront this particular challenge, and that is we need to do a proper evaluation of the intellectual corpus in Africa. In other words, we have a huge resources, books upon books upon books that have been written, but that have not been studied. Some of them are legal, I mean, jurisprudence. And like I said, my 1.5, 2 months stay in Timbuktu has helped me to see quite a lot of that. But I'm aware that in Egypt, in Alexandria in particular, we have huge materials. And you go to a number of other old universities in Africa, you find mosques and the traditional Islamic libraries, you find huge material that have not been studied. And there is a lot of knowledge there that we need to build on the existing. Now, one of the things that is affecting or might help explain the way some of these things are ignored and discarded, there is this conception or understanding, which I don't agree with, that the further you go in time, the more perfect, the more advanced societies become, and therefore you don't need a lot of this old knowledge, as it were. Now, this is something which comes with a particular understanding, Western understanding of history. Western understanding of history is linear. And this is why Fukuyama wrote his book, The End of History, meaning the world has become so developed that it has come to the end in terms of their ultimate, quest for perfection or quest for advancement. It has reached in terms of economy, a capitalist system of economy that is the most perfect arrangement. It has reached democracy, which is the most perfect form of governance. It has reached a certain level of intellectual culture, with its freedom, and therefore this is the ultimate. Now, that itself, I think, is wrong, because the empirical evidence available does not support this particular thing. But I think it is the one understanding of history that has, if you like, allowed us or made it possible for us to ignore the huge amount of intellectual material that we have that can actually help shape or reshape or reinvent our own societies, and give us solutions to the large problems that the world is grappling with today, and grappling without a particular solution. So this is one thing that I think we need to do as part of the challenge, to evaluate the corpus, the large body of literature and books and materials that are available in terms of Islamic scholarship in Africa. And I think one of the last points I would like is that we need to build on the past legacy to be able to meet our current educational needs. In other words, there are a lot of positive elements of the old teaching, or the old system of education. And one of them, perhaps to mention, is the fact that today educational systems might succeed in teaching you the skills that you require to live, to earn a living, or to help society, grow and tackle and solve problems. But it does not quite build the character. And it's an issue also that we keep raising as teachers in universities, that when you come to the convocation ceremonies where you award certificates to young graduates, you always say that this is in character and in learning. In fact, you mentioned character before learning. But what we know is that you may have done some learning, but you have not learned any character. If anything, you would be lucky to be as good in terms of character as you entered the university. And therefore, this issue of character is something that is missing in our educational system, modern educational system, that we need to go back to the Islamic educational system to be able to acquire. And therefore, there are lots of other things that we require today that are not available in the world that we are looking up to, that we need to go back to our own system of education to be able to acquire. And of course, the absence of character has shown its own impact, negatively in so many other fields, and we definitely need to recover to be able to do something. Perhaps I should stop here, and I would just like to recap, so that I'm not sure for how long I've spoken with that, but I'm sure I must have spoken for about 40 minutes or thereabouts. And then I hope I'll be able to take some questions if there are. So just to recap, the idea of this topic is to basically say that, well, look, education remains the most important issue in any community, but particularly in the Muslim community. Not only because the message of Islam itself started with a command to read before worship, before any other thing else, which underscores the significance of knowledge, but also because it's only with knowledge that you can grow and that you can solve problems, that you can live a purposeful life. Now, but what has happened to education today is that while we have had, if you like, for over a millennium, a very successful gradual growth in Islamic education, which has provided us with everything that we require, and which could have, but for the interruption, supplied us with even the most modern of technologies. But we have reached a point where Islamic education today, not only in Africa, but in many other Muslim communities, have been supplanted and is being superseded by an educational system which, while producing the technical know-how, does not produce the required character to build proper societies where you can actually have peace and you can really go to sleep, with your two eyes, closed. So it's an important issue, therefore, to find out what has gone wrong and what can we do to resolve these issues so that the future will be much better than we find it today. So perhaps I should stop here and let me see if there are questions that some people might want to ask. If I can answer, I do. If I can't, I will tell you and perhaps guide you to those that might have answers to these questions. Thank you very much. Mikdad, I hope I'm still within 40 minutes.
Of course, no, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. That was brilliant, and it's great to hear your insights. And we've got already 5 questions that have come in, so inshallah I'll ask them one by one. Starting off with Asia from YouTube. So please feel free to ask your questions either on YouTube chat, on Facebook, or here on Zoom. And you can ask Zoom if you'd like to ask live, you can ask live. So firstly, Asia from YouTube. Do these same tensions and conflicts surface between a secular education and a Christian religious education? Has that religious community been able to overcome these conflicts better?
Say it again. The tension between the...
So the question is, do these same tensions and conflicts between a secular education and a Christian religious education happen? Like, have the Christians been able to overcome those differences better than Muslim communities?
No, I think what the Christians have done was to give up. And what the Muslims have done is to refuse to give up. And I want to refer Asia to, if she can look up Bishop of London, New Begin. He's dead now, but I remember reading 2 of his papers on this argument. And one of them, I remember he was congratulating the Muslims for refusing to submit to this secular pressure. And he did say that Christians tried, but they gave up and they became what they became. So yes, the tensions were there. And if you remember, if you look at the Renaissance and the transition from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment period, you can see clearly the tensions. I mean, people who were anti-establishment, like Voltaire, for example, even if you like the author of the Divine Comedy, Dante Alighieri, they were anti-establishment, but they were still Christians. They saw themselves as Christians, and they speak as Christians. But when you get to the Enlightenment period, when you started having the, what's his name again, the man who wrote about the death of God, I mean, you can see the tensions in society and a lot of writings of people, along. And Christians continue to resist, but I think by the, I think 19th century, that's the 1800s or thereabouts, towards the end, they seem to have accepted the fate, and then they started finding even excuses for secular kind of life. But as you know, also secularism itself is full of conflict. I mean, because it's a conflict that has not been resolved. If I had opportunity to review a few books on secularism for the Islamic Foundation, and you can see clearly the conflict even between among secular, because how secular is an argument within secular literature. To what extent can you really do away with God? To what extent? So that level of secularism itself is a matter of debate. So to answer your question, as far as I know, there were tensions within the Christian community and the introduction of secular culture and secular worldview, but that tension, I suppose, it still remains. But the Christian clergy seem to have given up and accepted. What the Muslims have done is to refuse to accept the secular mantra, to refuse to accept the secular, worldview, and to insist that as Muslims, they want to remain as Muslims. And they try, of course, to accommodate what they can within the secular thinking, but you can see the tensions are still there. And I honestly think that it is about time we salvage the world from secular thinking. I mean, it's okay to be multi-religious or multicultural or multidimensional. This is all okay. But sadly, secularism has no real empirical or, if you like, it has no real intellectual roots that you can actually, it's full of conflict, and it's something that has no consensus, even among secularists. There is no consensus about what secularism really means. So perhaps I should stop there.
Thank you so much. One linked question, which is, to the extent that any polling can be impartial, why is it the case, therefore, that in Africa, the quality of education appears to be one of the worst in the world? When you look at the largest surveys of perceptions, no African country enters even the top 70. Does this show that actually secular education has been very successful?
I don't think it's the success of secular education. As I said, during the colonial period, the colonial policy was to destroy Islamic education. They made no mistakes about it. And one of the first things they did was to cut the supply line. And therefore, the schools, basically, even though many Muslims would prefer to maintain the Quranic school, would prefer to maintain, but it became a school from which you cannot proceed to really get the opportunities that others who went to the secular schools were getting. And so it was a carefully crafted system that excludes over time the Islamic education. Now, when you come to secular education, why those who have gone to secular education among the Muslims or maybe in Muslim countries are not doing as well as others who are in other secular education? This is again the reflection of the political economy in Africa and the level of the quality of governance in Africa. But remember, these same Muslim Africans, when they leave that environment, they come to Europe or they go to America or they go to China, they do just as well as any other European. In fact, they often excel well ahead others. So again, you come back to the fact that it is not the person, it is actually the circumstances that have been created. Because since colonial period, no country in Africa has actually been able to rise above the burden that colonialism has created yet to be able to be itself. We are still struggling we are struggling with a Western capitalist system. We are struggling with a Western governance system that doesn't quite fit the socio-cultural environment. It is like some kind of grafting of something that the body is rejecting, but is still there, stitched in some ways. It's not working. And there are lots of other ways. So I think it is the historical circumstances, but I can assure you it's not going to sustain, because these kind of arrangements are not sustainable. Now, how they are going to resolve eventually, I cannot yet say, but I think there is sufficient determination to resolve these issues over time.
Thank you very much. Ahmad Uncle, would you like to show your video and ask a question?
Assalamu alaikum, Usman.
Wa alaikum assalam. Good to see you. MashaAllah.
Likewise. Thank you. You mentioned, I think you're trying to blame colonialists a lot. So, I mean, don't you think it's to blame the way we are educating ourselves? So therefore, we want to educate on only religious kind of schools and not what you might call just secular. So for instance, I mean, if you look at Nigeria, if you look where the poverty is, where the Nigerians are impoverished, are the people who are in the Muslim areas, because they are focusing more on studying about religious education rather than religious education and secular education. We have the same issue in India, especially North India, where Muslims are impoverished. They are not getting on into higher education, or also because they are saying, oh, we cannot go into those schools or universities because they are secular. So they are suffering. So if you look at in India, in South India, where Muslims do take all kinds of education, and including their own religious education, they are doing very well, and they are completely integrated into the society and are contributing to the country as well.
I agree with you that we are often blamed for blaming colonization. But the point I want to make is that you cannot ignore the fact that colonization changed the way things were, and we are still trying to recover. I'm not in any way suggesting that because of colonization, all hopes are lost and we cannot do anything. In fact, what I'm basically trying to say, despite colonization, we can do a lot of things to change our educational system. And I personally don't see a secular education by itself, in itself, as a solution to this problem. I see an Islamic education that is comprehensive, that takes science and technology to greater heights, and that gives it the priority it is. But you have to generate a new type of ulama who are learned in both what is today called secular education and also learned in what is called the Islamic education. That dichotomy itself is part of the problem that we have to resolve, because that dichotomy does not exist in Islamic education. It does not exist because some of the people who wrote tafsir were also medical doctors, like Imam al-Razi, for example. Some of those who were engineers were opticians, and all the kind of big names are also religious scholars. So Islam does not recognize that dichotomy in the first place. And that dichotomy was like a reflection of what Europe went through during the period of enlightenment. We have no business going through what Europe went through during that period because our history was different. But we were like broken by the colonial intervention, and we can pick up and stitch ourselves and go back. So I when solving the problem, I don't want to say, okay, let's combine Islamic education and secular education. Rather, I would rather we say, let us promote the original idea of an Islamic education where science and technology takes the place they take, today, without losing anything about your own, Islamic, faith. So this is where we are diminished. We have not been able to come up with something. But in a way, Turkey is doing that. You know, if you look at Malaysia, it's also attempting to do that. And some of the Islamic universities, not that I am not a fan of Islamic universities, I must tell you, but I've seen one or two Islamic universities that are trying to do that. And that's what we need to do. And we have the resources to do it. It's the mindset that we have to change. When somebody tells you, oh, we don't have the funds, no, it's not the funds that is missing, it's the mindset. And we have got to change the mindset, because look at the amount of money we spend in going to Hajj, for example. I mean, Nigeria, at least every year, does 100,000 or more than that, going to Hajj. If you just take 10,000 from each of these pilgrims, you are running into billions. And you can do a more organized fundraising that people can, some kind of crowdfunding, and you can do your own universities. And this is some of the new thinking that is coming up. It's sad that it's taken us so long to do that. But again, two important points just to round up. When we refer to colonization, we are not being stuck as the problem. After all, the problem could have come from anywhere else, and problem is part of life, and I don't see that as a particular. But we want to understand what went wrong. So secondly, in trying to resolve this issue, we need to go back to the original Islamic education and recreate it as it used to be. But because we are going to recreate it in our day and age, it will be channeled towards meeting the needs of our society. What are the needs of our society? The needs of our society, is providing, the kind of solution to the problem of environment, the problem of economy, the problem of leadership in terms of politics. Knowledge must resolve these issues. Any knowledge that does not address the problem society is facing is irrelevant knowledge. And Islam is specific on relevancy of knowledge. If you remember the dua of the Prophet, I mean, the knowledge that can be used, right? So I think, and this is where we are deficient because we have not been able to create the momentum. We have not been able to generate or utilize the latent resources that we have to do that. But I am glad to say that right now there are a lot of discussions along this line, and there are a lot of people who are trying to move in this direction. And I'm confident that with time, we'll be able to get it over with, inshallah.
Thank you very much. Let's ask Iqbal Uncle to come in, if that's okay. We've got a couple more questions left, and then we'll close. Sorry.
Usman, thank you for that survey. One question which has always been troubling me is this question of the script. As you know, languages like Hausa or Swahili have changed the script to Latin script. Mm-hmm. Same way the Turkish language has changed the script to Latin script. What it has meant is that the people have lost their connection with the history, because now to go back and read your literature, which is all in the Hausa in Arabic script or Wolof in Arabic script or whatever, presents a great challenge. Now, I don't know how to resolve this question, because obviously going back again will then start the process again. But maybe the institutions we create must have a section to be able to access those resources in the original thinking. Because the script also brings with it culture, which is very, very important to keep that culture alive. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are already projects to return, first, not to lose that particular skill. I mean, incidentally, I was in Bayero University 2 days ago, and one of the people I had a meeting with is a specialist in using the Arabic script to write the Hausa language. We call it Ajami.
Yeah.
And there are still newspapers that are produced on that, just to make sure that we don't lose that particular thing. But then it requires a policy of government. And this is why we need to get more sensible people in governance, so that we can now be able to deploy the necessary resources. And the resources are available. It's not that we don't have the resources. And the good thing is, especially for Nigeria and to a great extent Sudan and maybe part of Mali, that I know, there is, still a significant amount of quest for a return to this. And this is something that is doable. It may take us the next 30 years, it may take us another 50 years, but it's doable. When Sudan decided to start producing graduates in engineering and medicine in Arabic, they did it. I mean, at first it looked crazy, but they were able to do it. Now they have graduates that they may not speak the kind of English you speak, Iqbal, but I mean, they understand English to that extent, but they are very, they are well rooted in their own. And they're able now to go back to those original scientific literature in Arabic to be able to understand it. Because the vocabularies they use were vocabularies that were taken from that particular thing. But also, permit me to make this point. There is an issue of confidence here. Those who have gone to the secular schools lost the confidence to do the kind of thing that will appear difficult. They'll tell you, no, we can't put resources, it's difficult. Those who have gone to or have remained with the traditional, they are also so intimidated that they don't even think about, any attempt. They just want to live their lives quietly in one corner, just worshiping God and, praying. And so we need a new generation with that particular confidence. And part of what we want to do to infuse that confidence, if you permit me, is to make it very clear that Europe, or China for that matter, is not the ultimate in terms of advancement. In fact, in Islam, we have not catch up with society that came before us. And part of what I have done personally in the university to build or to rebuild this confidence is to tell them, there are three major, I use three major examples. One of them is the pyramid. If you look at the pyramid, you look at the blocks, the size and the weight of the block. There is no crane in China or anywhere that can lift that particular thing. So how were they taken there? If you look at the construction, the engineering the technology that went into building the pyramid is not available today. So it's not like today is well advanced than anybody. If you go back to the time of Suleiman, the story of Bilqis, you look at what the Quran has said about the man who brought the throne of Bilqis, within the blink of an eye. He said, الذي له علم من الكتاب أنا آتيك به قبل أن يرتد إليك طرفك. It is not a miracle. The Quran speaks about a man with knowledge from a book, and that looks like the speed of light. So there are lots of other things that we can go back and so you don't have to be over impressed by what we have been able to do as a civilization now. You can always go back and see that others have done far better than we are doing now, which means that the opportunities and the what do you call it, the things we can do are enormous. And we should not limit ourselves to what just the Western civilization has been able to produce. After all, a lot of it, the startup was basically what Muslims have been able to proceed to produce. So I think the issue of confidence is also there. We need to rebuild that confidence. We need to show that it can be done. And we need to put all our intellect together and see how. Why this is necessary, Iqbal, I think it's because the world is exhausted. This civilization is exhausted. It has not been able to solve some of the major problems the world is facing. So we need to, go back, look inside and see where else can we look and find solutions to the problems. So this is all part of the debate that will make us to think. No, but I'm confident that we, shall overcome. Maybe not my generation and yours, Iqbal, but I think we should do the best we can so these young people might be able to come up with something better, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bugaje. And unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time. We it perhaps even gone a little bit over, but thank you. There have been lots of questions, very, very strong interest in what you've been able to say. So thank you for answering those questions and sharing your insights. Just a couple of quick announcements before we finish. On Tuesday next week, we have a talk by Sheikh Muhammad Hilli on the Wiladat of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And on Friday, we have the Wiladat of Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam by Sheikh Mahmoud Dala. The Friday after, we have a lawyer specializing in criminal law, Mariam Mir, who will be speaking to us about, do we really want to criminalize all hate speech? And then we have Munawwar Grami the next Friday, speaking about conceptualizing courage and resistance in the life of Zainab bint Ali, and she's speaking from South Africa. So thank you all very much for joining today, and whether you've joined on YouTube, Facebook, or here on Zoom, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmah. MashaAllah.